Hello again, everybody. Welcome to episode 7 of The Bitter Pill, the show where we offer up bitter pills of truth that many people don't want to swallow and that the corporate media doesn't want people to know exist. So, in this episode and the next 3 episodes, I think, I want to address a topic that's been hot in my Twitter feed lately, and that is the relative merits of Democratic presidential candidates Bernie Sanders and Tulsi Gabbard. So today I want to focus on domestic policy, and in part two, I'll take a detailed look at healthcare, um, and then there will be other parts on environmental policy, foreign policy, etc. So there have been a lot of pot shots taken at Tulsi Gabbard by some of Bernie Sanders supporters, and supporters of Tulsi Gabbard have fired back with criticisms of Bernie. But the overwhelming majority of the criticism of both of these candidates has come from uh, the mainstream press, the corporate media, the establishments of the two major parties, etc. So the ruling class in this country, basically, wealthy, powerful corporations, etc. So that should give you a clue as to uh, who these two individuals are politically. They're definitely not in the mainstream of the Democratic Party. Um, now, personally, I have criticisms myself of both Tulsi and Bernie, but also think there are quite a few positive aspects to their views on the issues and their um, political records. So that's what I'm going to be talking about here in the next few episodes. But speaking of bitter pills, there's 3 that I want to drop on you right up front. One is that there's a very good chance that the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, will be able to cheat whichever of these candidates is in contention for the nomination in July, should one of them be in contention. And obviously, at this point, the polling suggests that Bernie Sanders is far more likely to be in contention for the nomination. But whoever it is, the DNC is obviously out to get them, and so are the media. A second uh, thing that you need to remember is that uh, if one of these candidates is nominated, um, if they can pull off the nomination, which realistically speaking is only going to happen if one of them gets a majority of the pledged delegates, so they don't have to go to a second ballot where the super delegates can rig things. But if that happens, uh, you can bet your bottom dollar. In fact, I will bet you some small amount of money, because that's all I can afford, that a significant chunk of the political establishment that is at the moment anti-Trump or supposedly anti-Trump will side with Donald Trump against either Bernie Sanders or Tulsi Gabbard. And a third bitter pill that I want you to think about is that getting a progressive politician elected president, which really, I don't know if that's happened. Well, at least initially, I don't think it's ever happened in the United States. Now, Franklin Roosevelt was very progressive after a while, after he faced a lot of political pressure from people who were suffering through the Great Depression. But he didn't come in that way. But in any case, my point is that it's going to take a powerful political movement to bring about change in this country, regardless of who's elected president. And actually, both of these candidates have talked about that, particularly Bernie. Um, in fact, his campaign slogan is "Not me, us," and he talks a lot about how, uh, in his experience, really nothing changes in Washington unless there's a strong political movement to help push that change through. A grassroots movement of millions of citizens. Now, despite my reservations about these two candidates and about electoral politics generally, I do think there's value in their campaigns. I think they both are making positive contributions to the political conversation in this country. Bernie, principally through his class conscious approach to domestic politics, his emphasis on basic rights such as universal affordable health care and a living wage, and Tulsi principally through her emphasis on the staggering financial and human costs of U.S. military interventions abroad. Uh, Now, they both talk about those other issues. Tulsi certainly talks a lot about the same domestic issues as Bernie does, and vice versa. Bernie has some good stances on foreign policy. Um, so, as we'll see, uh, there's a lot to their candidacies, much more than what their main point of emphasis is. Certain domestic policies in Bernie's case, and foreign policy in Tulsi's case. Um, so I'm going to spend the next few videos going through both the positives and the negatives of um, each of these candidates, and mostly they're positives. They both are on the progressive end of the political spectrum. Um, and in fact, I would contend that along with Dennis Kucinich, who ran for president, I think in 2004, and Mike Gravel, who ran in 2008, Bernie and Tulsi are the strongest, most progressive candidates that have run as Democrats for president in this century. In fact, both Dennis and Mike, these two former candidates, have actually endorsed Tulsi Gabbard for president. There's Mike's endorsement of both Tulsi and Bernie. So Mike has endorsed Bernie as well as Tulsi. You don't often hear about his endorsement of Tulsi. And Dennis has recently endorsed Tulsi Gabbard. And I would recommend that you look up a recent event in New Hampshire where Dennis and Tulsi and I'm blanking on the third person's name. I'll put a link in the description. A foreign policy expert who's written some very good books, including a book called Overthrow. They did an event where they talked about U.S. foreign policy, and it was a very enlightening conversation. Actually, I would say that at least within the Democratic Party, these four candidates are the best candidates in the Democratic Party, at least for president, that I've seen in my lifetime. And I'm about 58 years old, so quite a ways back. At the same time, I do think that candidates such as Ralph Nader and Jill Stein, who ran for president in the Green Party, and Ralph ran independent in 2004, are a bit stronger policy-wise than any of the Democrats. And they also have made a very important case that we badly need a viable third party in this country, which most other countries on the planet have, and we don't. And also a very strong case for electoral reform, such as ranked choice voting, that help pave the way for viability of third or fourth or whatever parties. Anyway, back to comparing Bernie and Tulsi. One major thing that they have in common is that they've both been on the receiving end of vicious smear campaigns that have sought to dehumanize them and or portray them as really terrible people. Um, let me just show you a couple of video compilations by an excellent documentary filmmaker named Matt Orfala of the smears leveled at these two candidates by the mass media, the mainstream corporate media, as well as some footage refuting these claims by the media. And really, I mean, if you haven't seen these videos before, the contrast between what was said about these candidates and the reality is quite shocking. Okay, so here we go with the one about Bernie.
Sanders voter is at this point Bernie Sanders. Fall back. Please get away from us.
Okay.
Democrat Bernie is back, getting into the presidential race. Democrats like somebody new, and that is not going to be Bernie Sanders this time. It's really hard to imagine who the Bernie Sanders voter is at this point. Bernie Sanders, fall back. Please get away from us.
Hey, Senator, great to see you.
Thank you for doing this.
He has a kind of gruff, curmudgeon-y side that is, of course, well known. He doesn't actually smile that much.
It's almost like Bernie can't tell the difference between kids and adults.
All right, I think you're dumb. I think you're dumb if you don't sit down and learn how to read and write. No, you were not born stupid. Come here. The only way I think you're dumb, I think when you think you're dumb, because you're not.
He also, I think you're disheveled.
Well, so you see there, even people that some of us actually like Trevor Noah, pretty funny guy, host of The Daily Show. Even he smeared Bernie by editing a video clip to make it look like he was calling kids dumb, and you see the full context there, and that's obviously not what he was doing at all. So very dishonest tactic there, which it really pissed me off. It's unbelievable the ways in which they're misrepresenting who he is, or just flat out making things up in some cases.
He also, I think you're disheveled, you're unlikable, and you're pushy, and I don't think you should be leading anybody.
How old is too old?
I think the issue is, do you seem like you're in the contemporary world? He's a socialist from the 1950s yelling at people in the same screechy voice, without smiling, without any kind of personal connection. He looked like the angry man in the center of the stage saying, "Get off my lawn." And I don't think that's a good look for the Democratic Party.
I see him as sort of a not pro-woman candidate.
You may have heard the term Bernie bro. The Bernie bro, right? Somebody who's a bit younger, whiter, I think, than the overall Democratic primary.
I'm with my magnificent vanilla brother named Bernie Sanders. That's Brother Bernie Sanders we're talking about. That's Brother Bernie Sanders we're talking about.
Socialism has been a manifest disaster.
Alec would still be here today if I had known that I could come to Canada.
Alex Smith died after trying to ration a vial of insulin when he couldn't afford more.
So his idea about, free health care, he has seen the manifest atrocities that have occurred under socialism.
$1,000 got me 6 months of insulin for my son. That's still less than what I pay a month in the United States.
Gloria Steinem has suggested that younger women are supporting Bernie Sanders so they can meet boys.
Hello, Bernie. We lost our condo, got foreclosed on because of my medical bills.
Like, I don't understand young women who support him.
I trust that Bernie Sanders is going to fight for health care and to lower prescription costs.
Of all the presidential candidates, you're the one that I trust.
Thank you so much for what you're doing. You're just giving us hope. Thank you. And we got your back.
I think he comes off as mean. I think he's disparaging.
I don't want to overpromise.
Bernie Sanders makes my skin crawl, and I can't even identify for you what exactly it is.
Bernie Sanders has done nothing between 2016 and today.
Thank you for everything you've done these last few years. You've helped to reset our political discourse, and are demanding that we center our politics around justice and equity. I am hopeful because right now, there is a mass movement of people from all over this country, rising up.
Thank you all very much.
It ain't Bernie, it is us.
If we come together, we will win. People always say, "Oh, you're being too vocal."
Hey, Bernie, you don't have to yell.
I don't feel I'm being vocal enough. We are not being vocal enough. When is enough enough?
He sounds very, very shouty.
Louder. Yeah, we gotta get louder. How many kids are gonna have to make this sacrifice and die? How can you sleep at night knowing that kids can't afford insulin? How is that possible?
It's not right.
Wow, very moving video. Yeah, it makes me tear up and it makes me angry every time I see it. Anyway, let's take a look now at a similar video that Matt made about Tulsi Gabbard, juxtaposing the just vicious attacks on her by the media with footage showing who she really is.
Fellow service members, veterans, know that your selflessness, your dedication, and your commitment will never be forgotten.
Hillary Clinton called Tulsi Gabbard, quote, the favorite of the Russians.
She's a favorite of the Russians. She's also a Russian asset.
Our troops and veterans' willingness to sacrifice everything cannot be taken lightly. It must be honored.
She's the favorite of the Russians.
She uses this language that feels straight out of kind of the Kremlin.
Our government should be of the people, by the people, and for the people.
A weird Kremlin-y view that she has of the world.
Freedom is not free.
I just think that she could be a useful idiot to the Russians.
Yeah. We must stand united against those in both parties who never tire of war.
It gives the Russians exactly what they want.
To build that brighter future with peace.
She's endorsed by, by sort of the Russians.
David Duke.
She's never renounced the Russian support. There have been about 20 Russian bot websites that have supported her since she's announced her run for the presidency.
Tulsi Gabbard, we've seen Russia propaganda prop her up.
Tulsi Gabbard's my girl. I'm voting for her.
The way she talks about regime change wars is exactly the same way that Russia talks about them.
I will end these regime change wars and instead invest actually into serving the needs of the American people.
Thank you.
There is no question that Tulsi Gabbard is a puppet for the Russian government.
I was a Marine in Vietnam, and I agree with Tulsi Gabbard. These regime change wars are just, they're just wrong.
For Russia, what she says is perfect for what they want Americans to hear.
That we're all connected as Americans, united by the founding principles enshrined in our Constitution and our Bill of Rights.
So whether or not Tulsi Gabbard is aware of this, whether or not she's even completely has complete knowledge of what's happening. The Russians are propping her up.
My name's Chris from Mississippi. I believe Tulsi will do all she can to heal our divides here at home.
She wants to work on us first and help this country and help everyone unite together. Supporting Tulsi Gabbard primarily for her selfless dedication to the country.
What Hillary Clinton is trying to say is the Russians are at their dirty work.
I'm a veteran, and I see Tulsi as honorable, trustworthy.
I'm a Marine veteran. I served in Iraq. I agree with Tulsi.
As a veteran myself, she will not treat my brothers and sisters as equipment, numbers on a board.
This is personal to me because I served in Iraq, where I served in a medical unit, where every single day I saw the terribly high human cost of war.
Oh, look, a useful idiot.
The Kremlin may be focused on Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard.
I'm a U.S. Army veteran, and I want Tulsi for president to end these atrocious wars.
Please wake up.
I'm a U.S. Army veteran, and I support Tulsi. She clearly cares about the American people.
While her opponents are serving us platitudes, she's serving us in the National Guard.
I am a former U.S. soldier, and I am unapologetically a supporter of Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard.
I had over 10 years in the Army. I salute Tulsi Gabbard.
I joined the Navy back in 1977, and I support Tulsi Gabbard.
No Democrat really likes her.
She's the candidate I have been waiting for as a Democrat.
Stop calling your fellow Americans Russian.
We don't want any more wars. We understand if there's a war and it happens, we have to fight, but at the same time, we don't need to create them.
Good night, and good luck.
Okay, well, yeah, another really powerful video, I thought, from Matt Orfala, just juxtaposing this vicious campaign of xenophobic dehumanization of Tulsi Gabbard and often her supporters with the truth, with what people think of her who are supporting her and why they support her, and some of what she's really about. And you just, when you hear the corporate media talk about foreign policy, about what we're doing overseas, I mean, you just never actually get the sense of the colossal destruction and waste of money and just horrific consequences of these wars. You don't get that. Anyway, you can see what the main source of these smear campaigns is that you saw in the video. It's primarily the so-called liberal media, quote-unquote liberal. MSNBC, CNN, the broadcast networks. If you look through the print media, it's outlets like the Washington Post, the New York Times, Politico, the Daily Beast, etc. There are also certainly many attacks on these two candidates from the political right, from Fox News and the like. But interesting contrast if you watch, for example, Bernie's town hall appearance on Fox, or Tulsi's appearances on Fox News, Tucker Carlson, for example. If you contrast that with their appearances on shows on CNN, MSNBC, other outlets, they can go on the more conservative media outlets, and often they're allowed to talk uninterrupted. They're asked reasonable questions. They have plenty of opportunity to get their message out, and yet the networks that are most aligned with their own political party, the Democratic Party, are constantly interrupting them and talking over them and asking them very loaded questions, trying to pose gotcha questions or smear them right to their face. And it's really, incredible to see. So neither Bernie nor Tulsi are wanted by the political establishment of the Democratic Party, which includes the majority of the mainstream media. A particularly horrible instance of such an interview that I listened to was on NPR. There was a commentator named Robin Young who interviewed Tulsi, and it was, literally 15 to 20 minutes of nonstop attacks by this Robin person. And eventually Tulsi just said, "I've had enough," and left, walked out. Good for her. Anyway, so as you presumably have heard, unless you've been living under a rock lately, the folks attacking Bernie now include Elizabeth Warren, one of her fellow candidates, who would have us believe that Bernie is so sexist that he doesn't even believe a woman can be president. And never mind that he's repeatedly said the opposite of that. Dating back to 1987, and actually Tulsi Gabbard has spoken up in his defense. Let's see if I can find it for you. Oh, no, sorry. Let's try again. Oh, wrong folder. Sorry. So, as you may have heard, the story was that Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders had a meeting in December 2018 to discuss their possible candidacies for president. And Warren indicated that she was planning on running for president. And according to the story that was leaked to CNN, the Warren campaign apparently told CNN that Bernie had said that he didn't think a woman could win in a campaign for president. And Bernie's response to that was, what are you talking about? I just got through campaigning for Hillary Clinton a couple of years ago. She did, in fact, win the popular vote, which in almost every other country in the world would mean she would be the president or prime minister or whatever. We're one of about the only country I can think of where somebody can get less votes than other candidates and be elected. But anyway, she got about 3 million more votes overall than Donald Trump did. So, obviously a woman can be president, and Bernie knows that. And in fact, he asked Elizabeth Warren to run for president back in 2015, and she didn't. So Bernie, at that point, decided to run himself. But obviously, he wouldn't have asked her if he thought that she couldn't win. Now, that would be freaking stupid. Anyway, Tulsi also met with Bernie Sanders in December 2018 before she announced in January that she was running for president. She said, we had a nice one-on-one conversation, and I informed him that I would be running for president. In that meeting, he showed me the greatest respect and encouragement, just as he always has. Bernie also stood up for Tulsi when Hillary Clinton smeared her as a Russian asset. He said, Tulsi Gabbard has put her life on the line to defend this country. People can disagree on issues, but it is outrageous for anyone to suggest that Tulsi is a foreign asset. There's also quite a bit of bigotry involved in some of the attacks on Bernie and Tulsi. And so just have a look here at this article in Politico magazine about Bernie Sanders. The title of the article is The Secret of Bernie's Millions. How did he amass 3 houses and a net worth approaching at least $2 million? The surprisingly conventional middle class climbing a radical sounding socialist. So somehow the fact that he has been a senator or representative in Congress for almost 3 decades, and wrote a book that was a bestseller, and thus made some money from that is somehow this terrible thing. Even though he's almost the least wealthy candidate in the race, only I believe Tulsi Gabbard and Pete Buttigieg have lower net worths than Bernie Sanders among the presidential candidates. Anyway, check out this graphic. It shows Bernie next to a money tree with a big fancy house there in the background. And then farther down in the article, where is it? There you go. Bernie with holding his 3 houses. He's got a condo in D.C. because, of course, he works there, and he's from Vermont, so he has to have a house there. He's also got a vacation house on a lake, which in a roundabout way came through his wife's inheritance when her parents died. So nothing fishy about him acquiring those properties whatsoever. They're not extraordinarily big houses like Obama's. He's referred to in the article as rich and cheap. So just outright anti-Semitism in this article. Meanwhile, Tulsi has been smeared for being Hindu. She said, during my 2012 and 2014 elections, my Republican opponent stated publicly that a Hindu should not be allowed to serve in the U.S. Congress, and that Hinduism is incompatible with the U.S. Constitution. In the 2016 race for Congress, my Republican opponent said repeatedly that a vote for me was a vote for the devil because of my Hindu religion. And in addition to that, there have been many criticisms of Tulsi for meeting with Indian Prime Minister Modi back in 2014, and again last year when he visited the United States again. And he said some complimentary things about him back in 2014. But dozens of other U.S. politicians have met with Indian Prime Minister Modi, including Barack Obama, who met with him several times and wrote a very laudatory article about Modi in Time magazine. I can put a link to that video description. And yet Obama was never attacked for meeting or saying anything nice about Modi. Tulsi has said, well, look, I met with lots of Indian politicians on my trip to India from both major parties. I don't take, I don't support or side with any particular politician or party in India. It's part of my job to meet with foreign leaders. She's on the Foreign Affairs Committee in the House, the Armed Services Committee, etc. So that's been part of her role ever since she came into Congress back in 2013. Both Bernie and Tulsi have been criticized by some people on the left for a variety of reasons, and I do think some of the criticisms are legitimate. I'm on the left myself and have criticisms of both candidates, and I will discuss them in subsequent videos. But others are really just plain smears that have been picked up by some progressives or socialists or whatever for a variety of reasons. People tend to believe things that are repeated frequently, or that they hear from people they know and like, or that they trust. Even if there's no solid evidence presented that something is true, if people hear it a lot, especially if it comes from people whose opinions they think are valid or sources they think are valid, then they're likely to believe what they hear, even when what they hear amounts to nothing more than ad hominem attacks. But really, that's the subject for another video. I want to focus in this series of videos that I'm making here on comparison of verifiable facts about Bernie's and Tulsi's rhetoric and record, rather than on, as Tulsi put it, in responding to attacks on her by the View host Joy Behar, innuendos that have nothing to do with who I am, is what she said about Behar's attacks on her. So in the description below the video, I will put some links to articles that I've come across and a couple that I've written myself, rebutting claims that have been made that I consider to be illegitimate. I'll put them in the video description. So I wrote an article responding to a piece that appeared, amazingly enough, on a site called Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, that ordinarily does really good criticism of corporate media bias. But this article was itself very biased. I also responded to an article in The Nation magazine by journalist Jeet Heer called "The Real Trouble with Tulsi." So as you can see, I responded to it there. But anyway, my focus here is on who Tulsi and Bernie actually are. So broadly speaking, both Tulsi and Bernie are very much on the liberal, progressive side of the spectrum in terms of domestic as well as foreign policy, with arguably Bernie having a slight edge in terms of domestic policy, and Tulsi having an edge in terms of foreign policy. Just in a nutshell, to give you a sneak preview. So in this video, I'm talking about domestic policy. So just to kind of summarize very briefly, both of these candidates support a living wage, at least $15 an hour as the minimum wage in the United States. Both support free college. Tulsi does have an income limit on four-year free college. I think it's like $125,000, I want to say. And Bernie proposes free college for everybody. They both have proposed a number of reforms to the financial sector of the economy, such as reinstating the Glass-Steagall Act that regulated sort of speculative transactions that arguably were the main cause of the 2008 financial crisis that we all suffered through. And that some very wealthy people made out like bandits during. So reinstate the Glass-Steagall Act, regulate the banks and financial institutions better. Both support that. They support legislation to break up the big banks and antitrust legislation in general. A universal taxpayer-funded health care system where care is free at the point of service. In other words, Medicare for all. Both support that. Bernie Sanders actually wrote the Medicare for all bill in the Senate, and Tulsi is a co-sponsor of Pramila Jayapal's Medicare for all bill in the House. Both support legalization of marijuana. Both support abolition of private prisons. Both of them support comprehensive election and campaign finance reform, such as overturning the Supreme Court Citizens United decision, eliminating gerrymandering, efforts to stop voter suppression, which costs Bernie Sanders a lot of votes in the 2016 primaries, and cost Hillary Clinton a lot of votes in the general election in 2016, and it certainly at other levels as well. It certainly cost Stacey Abrams the 2018 Georgia governor's race. Something like 300,000 people, including Martin Luther King's cousin, were denied the right to vote in Georgia alone in 2018. Both Tulsi and Bernie have 100% ratings on their voting records on LGBT rights, abortion rights, and women's rights. Planned Parenthood and other groups have given both of them very high ratings. Both of them have introduced comprehensive climate change plans. Tulsi's the only member of Congress, actually, that's introduced a comprehensive climate change bill. That was the Off Fossil Fuels Act, introduced in fall of 2017. And Bernie recently introduced a very detailed climate change plan that actually is quite similar to Tulsi's. Both call for a ban on fracking and nuclear power and phasing out fossil fuels by the early 2030s. But I'm going to actually talk about that in a later video. So I'm not going to go through a point-by-point comparison of where each of the candidates stands on every domestic issue. You can find out more on each candidate's campaign website. I've got Bernie's pulled up here, and there's Tulsi's official campaign website, issues page. Bernie's site does contain more detailed information, at least on domestic issues, than Tulsi's does. I do wish Tulsi's campaign would provide a little bit more detail. So far, she hasn't released specifics on her healthcare plan. That will hopefully be happening soon. The campaign has said they will be releasing it before the primaries start. But there are also sites managed, and I assume this is true for Bernie as well. There are sites managed by supporters that provide very extensive information about Tulsi's legislative record and policy stands and statements. So TulsiGabbard.org is one of them. There's also one called PresidentTulsiGabbard.org. And I encourage folks who want more information to look at all of these sites about both Tulsi and Bernie, because you can only get so much information out of campaign stump speeches or appearances on the debate stage, where they have to be much more brief and focused, whereas you can go to TulsiGabbard.org, for example, or BernieSanders.com and find out where they stand on almost every issue you can think of, as well as links to, well, at least on the TulsiGabbard.org site, there are a lot of links to her voting record, bills that she sponsored or co-sponsored, or how she voted on them. So in the next video, I want to take a close look at an issue that's very much on people's mind in this election. The issue of healthcare, which has been rated the #1 concern by a lot of, by voters generally. And this is the issue, of course, if you've been following the campaign, that Bernie has focused on the most, healthcare reform. And Tulsi also talks about it, but her bigger emphasis in her campaign appearances has been on foreign policy. But both candidates do have detailed ideas about healthcare. Tulsi is a sponsor of the Medicare for All bill in the House. Bernie actually wrote the Medicare for All bill in the Senate. So I'm going to go into that in the next video, and then I'm also going to talk about the two candidates' environmental plans in another video, and then wrapping up this series, I'll be doing a video on foreign policy as well as some other issues, and just kind of comparing the two candidates as people, and just kind of talking about what I see the value of their candidacies as being, potentially. So let me just conclude part 1 by saying that, as I've partially made a case for today, Bernie and Tulsi are the two most progressive candidates, really by far. We all know who Elizabeth Warren really is, that she's not the other progressive in the race, now that she's revealed that she's trying to sabotage Bernie Sanders' campaign and is not really his friend. But for somewhat different but related reasons, they're both perceived as very threatening by the political establishment, and as a result, they've been subjected to vicious personal attacks. But we're gonna talk about who Bernie and Tulsi really are, and why either one, in my view, would make among the best presidents that we've had in U.S. history, which, honestly, that's not saying much, because almost all of them have been really bad as far as I'm concerned. But in any case, please like and subscribe to the channel. Chip in a few bucks on Patreon if you're so inclined. And stay tuned for episode 8, where I will drill down into the details on healthcare. See you next time.